Claudette with theycallmemartha.com. Today I'm going to show you how you can make this adorable shaker card in the shape of a graduation cap. We're going to start by building our card base for our shaker card. I want my finished card to be 5.5 inches square. So I'm starting out with a piece of 110-pound cardstock that is 5.5 by 11. And I'm just going to score it at 5.5 to create my card base. So here I've got my 11-inch side along the top of my scoreboard, and I'm scoring at 5.5. Just going to fold and burnish that with my bone folder. And then we're going to build our shaker card right on this base. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can build a shaker card. Let me show you what that looks like. Here's a couple different versions. So the idea is to create a well for your shaker bits to move around. You can do that by layering paper or layering foam. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you can achieve this. Let's start by looking at the foam. And so what I've done is I've cut some strips of, in this case, black foam. And I chose black because I wanted it to really disappear on the finished card. If you have white foam, that's okay too. You're just going to see more of the foam along the side. So I have cut my strips all the same length so that it makes building my card easier. And I'm just going to start by putting my edges along the left-hand side here and along the lower edge of my card base. And then I'm going to start with the next piece of foam in this corner. And I'm making sure that the edges are firmly pushed against each other. You don't want any gaps at all in your foam, or else your glitter or your sequins will eventually come out through those gaps. So I'm just going to work my way around the card base. Again, I'm making sure that there's no gaps in the foam, and then I'm following the perimeter edge of my card base. And then you get a really nice finished edge. And here's the last piece of foam. And then this is really ready for your shaker bits, unless you want to go around one more time by creating 2 rows of foam. Then you're going to get a deeper well if you have more bits that you want to shake. But that's how you can use foam to create the shaker well. Another way you can do it is by layering paper. I've used my scan and cut to create a frame. And so here I've plotted in a 5.5-inch square, and then I made a 4.5-inch square and layered it right in the middle so that when it cut, it created this frame. And I just repeatedly cut that frame until I ended up with enough that once I stacked them and glued them on top of each other, that I would achieve that same effect as what I accomplished with the foam. So I think I did about 7 or 8 layers of this 110-pound cardstock, and then I was able to build a well that had about this exact same dimensions as the foam. You can also use dies. And so what I did is I pulled out a set of my Spellbinder dies, and I just picked a couple that were about the size I was looking for, and I just layered them one inside the other, and I've used a piece of repositionable tape to hold them together. As I run this through my die cut machine, I end up with that exact same square. And the only thing I would caution you is to make sure that you do not move this tape. So every time that you run it through your die cut machine, they're exactly the same. If you had to reposition these every time, they would not be exactly the same. All right, now once you have all of your frames cut, what I do is I glue them together to create my well. And I usually just start by layering in a little bit of wet glue. You don't want to use a ton, but just enough that you make sure that it's going to adhere to the next. So here's my next frame, and I'm just lining it up on top of the next. And I'm just going to work my way around both the outer edge and the inner edge with my fingers, and just make sure that your edges are lined up. And you just keep repeating this process over and over again until you get enough of a reveal to allow for your shaker bits. And then you want to glue this to your card base. So in this case, I would apply a glue all the way around my frame and then glue it to my card base just like that. We have the shaker card that's built using the foam. We have the shaker card that's built using paper. Again, you can choose which method works best for you, but they both accomplish the same thing. So now we have our card base all ready to go. And how do we fill it? How do we finish our card? I've cut myself a piece of acetate that is just slightly smaller than my finished card. The reason why I don't cut it in the exact dimension is because I want to make sure that it won't accidentally peek out the side if I misglue it with my shaker bits inside. You have to be really careful once you have all of your sequins and everything inside that you don't shift this around. So I tend to cut mine about 1/4 inch smaller so that when I glue it to my card base, there's no risk of it peeking out either side. In this case, I've cut my clear acetate at 5 1/4 by 5 1/4. And what I like to do is I like to punch a hole in the middle now, and that will allow me to attach my tassel. And the easiest way to do that is if you create yourself a little template. I'm just going to use a piece of just regular copy paper, and I'm going to mark the size of my acetate here, and I just want to find the center. I find this the easiest way to do it, and so I'm just going to use my ruler to find center just by making a mark across both corners. And so I know where the cross meets is my center. And if I line my acetate back up to my template here and I poke a little hole, let me get my little pokey tool here. I'm going to poke a hole right there in the middle. And that's where I'm going to attach my tassel here in just a minute. You want to do this step before you go any further because once it's glued down, you won't be able to attach your tassel. Now I'm going to show you how I make my tassels. And I think the easiest way to make a tassel is to use embroidery floss. And they look like this in case you're unfamiliar with them. You find them usually in the sewing or yarn section of your craft store. And here I picked purple. I've cut a piece of chipboard scrap that's about 5 1/2 inches tall. The width doesn't matter. And I'm just going to start by wrapping my embroidery floss around the length of this chipboard. And depending on how full you want your tassel, that would be how many times you would go around your chipboard. I'm going to do about, 12 or 15 loops around. About like that. And then you want to take a shorter piece of your embroidery floss and just tuck it underneath all of those pieces that you just wrapped and pull it toward the top. And here's where you want to tie a knot. I pull my edges to the top here and I'm just going to tie a knot. And then I like to tuck my knot underneath my tassel before I finish it. So I'm going to carefully trim the excess after my knot. Make sure that you don't cut your knot off. And then I'm just going to pull my loop around so that that little knot is tucked behind the embroidery floss. And this will allow you to hang your tassel off your hat. And now I can take a pair of scissors and I can cut off my loops. So I've just tucked my scissors behind the embroidery loops and I'm just giving it a quick cut. And now it comes free from my template. The next thing I like to do is tie a second knot along my top loop just by holding it here in my left hand, making sure that that little knot stays tucked behind my embroidery floss. So I'm holding my knot here underneath my thumb and forefinger, and I'm just going to tie another loose knot that is closer to the base of my tassel. So as I pull it down and around, I want that knot to come closer to the top of my tassel. To finish your tassel, what you want to do is cut another piece that's about 10 inches long. And I'm just going to take about 2 inches of it and lay it on top of my tassel and hold it with my thumb. And then I'm going to take this part and wrap it around my tassel about 5 or 6 times. And this just creates that finished loop at the top of your tassel. And then once you've gone around and round, I'm just going to pick up that tail that we were holding down with our thumb, and I'm going to tie a little knot. Now I'm only going to tie one knot for right now because I want to tie on my little charm that has my graduation year. I'll do that here in just a minute. So I've tied one little knot, and now our tassel is almost finished. Let's go ahead and create the charm for that. Okay, to finish off my tassel, I want to add a little tag that shows the graduation year. What I did was I found in my stash, I had this die set called Tiny Tag Dies by Sizzix, and I just used this really small tag, and I cut about 3 or 4 out of cardstock, and I'm going to layer them together so that I have a little bit more stability. And then from the Tim Holtz specimen die set, I use the little tiny numbers to cut a 2 and a 3 for our graduation year. So I'm going to show you how I assemble this. So I have 2 that are black and 2 that are purple. My finished card is actually going to be purple, and so that's why I wanted my little tag to be that same finished color. So I'm just adding a little bit of glue to my tags. I'm going to layer them very similar to what we did with our frames when we glued them all together. And I like to do several layers so that it won't tear off of our tassel. So here I have 2 that are purple, and then I have 2 more that are black that are made out of thicker cardstock, very much like our base. I'm going to layer those together, and then now I'm going to join the black with the purple. Now I have a nice strong base for my graduation year. Just going to give that a second to dry. I'm making sure that all my edges are nicely lined up and that my inside circle is all lining up. And so now I have that cute little tag. Okay, I'm going to use my tweezers to help me out here a little bit because these are so little. I'm going to add a little bit of glue to the back, and then I'm going to place them down on my little tag. I love this die set so much, this specimen die, because the little numbers are just so cute, and I think that they can be used for so many different things. Now they are so teeny tiny, you don't need hardly any glue at all. So I'm putting my glue on, and then I'm just going to tap it on my finger just to take away some of that extra, and then lay it down on my little tag. And you should have a moment to move it around a little bit and line it up. So there's my cute little graduating year. And now I'm going to hang this from my tassel. So to do that, I'm going to work with that knot that was in the front. Remember, we tied it once around. Find my ends here. I'm going to thread my tag through and then tie a knot nice and tight. Put a little drop of glue and tie a second knot before cutting off these little tails. Make sure that you're really careful not to cut through your knot. Okay, now I have my clear acetate, and I marked a hole in the middle. And then I have a little brad. I'm just going to pop the tails of the brad through that hole. And then before securing the little prongs on the brad, I'm going to take the loop of my tassel and loop it over the brad. Opened up the prongs on my brad, and then I like to take a hole punch and just cut a little circle of paper to cover up the back of that brad. And I do this just so that the sequence in my shaker card doesn't get hung up on it. You're never going to see it, but it's just one of those little things that I have found really keeps the card functioning well and the little shaker bits going where they're supposed to go. So I'm just going to cover up where I've opened up the little legs of my brad. I'm going to set this aside while we work on our shaker. What I did was I wanted my finished card to be purple. I went ahead and cut another frame exactly using the same method as I did for my card base. This time I cut it in purple. And this is going to finish off the front of our card. And the middle of that frame is going to be the inside of the little well where we're going to put our shaker bits. I do like to trim just the top and right sides just ever so slightly, like 1/16 of an inch, just so that it fits nicely inside the card. I'm just going to take that little bit off, like just a sliver, on the right side and the top. And then it should fit within the well of our card. Yep, fits perfectly. Then I'm going to put just a little bit of glue behind this. You don't need a ton because it should be pretty snug. And I also don't want any glue oozing out from underneath it because our shaker bits could get caught on it. Just going to plot that inside. And then I'm going to use just a little spatula here from my Cricut just to make sure that my corners are nicely adhered. If you do see a little bit of glue pop up, I'm just going to take a cloth here and make sure that I wipe that up. This is just a baby wipe that I leave out overnight to dry, and they make the best cloths for picking up the little glue when it oozes out. Now we have our card ready to finish, and you can decide if you want your card to fold up or you would rather your card fold to the left. I like to add this piece of paper on the inside just as I would any regular card. This is just 5 1/4 by 5 1/4 so that I end up with a nice border all the way around. If you have some graduating stamps, you can do a little sentiment on the inside of your card. And then if you would like to add another one to the top, you can add a second one. And I also, let me find my scoreboard, make a little gift card pocket. This is 5 1/4 by 5 1/4. Make a little pocket. I'm gonna just score at like 2. And then you can fold it up and burnish it down and just put a little bit of glue on the left and right sides to form a little pocket. And you can glue that on the inside of your card, and this is where it's important to know if you want it to open up or you want it to open to the left. In this case, I think I'm going to have it open to the left, so I'm going to glue my little pocket on this side. And it's easier to do this before you start to add your little shaker bits inside. If you're going to stamp a sentiment for the inside, I would also advise doing that before you put it on your card. And this gives me just a little bit of time to move it around and make sure that it's straight. Now I have a great spot to put a little gift card or some cash. All right, to finish out the card, I'm going to bring back in my clear acetate and get that ready to go. And I'm going to fill up my shaker well with a few different things. This is jumbo glitter. It's translucent. I think I got this at Walmart. was very inexpensive. I love it because it picks up the color of whatever paper is underneath. So I'm just going to add in some of that. And then I want to add something that's going to give it some sound when you shake it. And seed beads work great for that. So I've got some platinum seed beads, or you can do silver, purple, whatever kind of coordinates with your look. And then I'm going to add a little bit of clear sequins. And you don't need a ton of this, just enough that it will move around. And then lastly, I'm going to finish with some purple. This is by Doodlebug. It's actually in the color lilac. I'm going to add a little bit of that as well. And then before I seal it up, I do like to just run my fingers through it and make sure that I'm separating the pieces of sequins. A couple times I've made a shaker card and I found that some of the pieces are stacked together like when they're cut. And once you seal it, you can't break them apart. So I just take a minute here and just go through it. And then I'm going to shake it just slightly so that it's level. And now I'm going to glue my clear acetate panel on top. You do want to add glue all the way around and make sure that you have no gaps in your glue, but you don't want to over glue. If you over glue, it's going to seep out through your acetate and you'll see it. So I'm putting my glue all the way around the edge and not a ton. It's very thinly applied. And then if you have a clear protective film on your acetate, make sure you pull it off. And then I'm going to lay my acetate right over top of my card and press it down. And you can see here in the corner where the glue oozed out, and that will stay wet for quite a while. So I'm going to make sure that I do not move my shaker card until all the glue is dry and it's clear, or else all the little sequins and everything will stick to that corner. So I'm going to try to keep my card as still as possible. And then the last step is to take your purple frame and to glue this on top of your clear acetate. So I'm just applying my glue all the way around. Again, you don't need a ton here because you don't want it oozing out and showing on that acetate. And I'm just going to center it. And now you must really be patient while you wait for that glue to dry. Try not to shake your card around. And I'm just going to go around with my finger carefully around the edge and make sure that all my edges line up and give it a good press. And now your card can sit and dry, and when it's all finished, you will have a really fun shaker. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. It really helps me grow my channel. And if you like my content and you want to come back for more, please consider subscribing.